Welcome to our series, Questions and Answers for a World in Crisis. So many of you are writing concerning problems, and we have now reached about 140 to 160 different terms to be researched in the light of the writings of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And today we take up difficulties. First, Sri Aurobindo on difficulties in the spiritual path. All who enter the spiritual path have to face the difficulties and ordeals of the path, those which rise from their own nature and those which come in from outside. The difficulties in the nature always rise again and again till you overcome them. They must be faced with both strength and patience. But the vital part is prone to depression when ordeals and difficulties rise. This is not peculiar to you, but comes to all sadhaks. It does not imply an unfitness for the sadhana or justify a sense of helplessness, but you must train yourself to overcome this reaction of depression, calling in the Mother's force to aid you. Yoga has always its difficulties, whatever yoga it be. Moreover, it acts in a different way on different seekers. Some have to overcome the difficulties of their nature first, before they get any experiences to speak of. Others get a splendid beginning and all difficulties afterwards. Others go on for a long time, having alternate risings to the top of the wave and then a descent into the gulfs, and so on, till the difficulty is worked out. Others have a smooth path, which does not mean that they have no difficulties. They have plenty, but they do not care a straw for them, because they feel that the divine will help them to the goal, or that he is with them even when they do not feel him. Their faith makes them imperturbable. The Mother. Hand over your problems to the divine, and he will pull you out of all difficulties. Never complain about the difficulties on the way, for each is an opportunity for new progress. The difficulties can disappear only when the egoistic concentration upon desires and conveniences disappears. The nature of your difficulty indicates the nature of the victory you will gain, the victory you will exemplify in yoga. Thus, if there is persistent selfishness, it points to a realization of universality as your most prominent achievement in the future. And when selfishness is there, you have also the power to reverse this very difficulty into its opposite, a victory of utter wideness. When you have something to realize, you will have in you just the characteristic which is the contradiction of that something. Face to face with the defect, the difficulty, you say, "Oh, I am like that. How awful it is." But you ought to see the truth of the situation. Say to yourself, "My difficulty shows me clearly what I have ultimately to represent. To reach the absolute negation of it, the quality at the other pole, this is my mission." Even in ordinary life, we have sometimes the experience of contraries. He who is very timid and has no courage in front of circumstances proves capable of bearing the most. To one who has the aspiration for the divine, the difficulty which is always before him is the door by which he will attain God in his own individual manner. It is his particular path towards the divine realization. There is also the fact that if somebody has 100 difficulties, it means he will have a tremendous realization, provided, of course, there are in him patience and endurance, and he keeps the aspiring flame of Agni burning against those defects. And remember, the grace of the divine is generally proportioned to your difficulties. The best remedy is to stop thinking of yourself and your defects and difficulties. Forget your difficulties. Think only of being a more and more perfect instrument for the divine to do his work, and the divine will conquer all your difficulties and transform you with love and blessings. 5th March, 1968. Be grateful for all ordeals. They are the shortest way to the divine. The joy one experiences in living for an ideal is the sure compensation for all the difficulties of the path. The difficulties are always due to a resistance. Some part or several parts of the being refusing to receive the force, the consciousness, and the light put upon them, and revolting against the divine influence. It is rare that somebody can surrender entirely to the divine's will without having to face one or another of these difficulties. But to keep steady one's aspiration and to look at oneself with an absolute sincerity are the sure means to overcome all obstacles. Difficulties are sent to us exclusively to make the realization more perfect. Mother writes in February 1968, "Difficulties come because there are possibilities in you. If in life everything was easy, then it would be a life of nothing. Because difficulties come on your way, it shows you have possibilities. Do not be afraid. And in 1969 she writes, "The difficulties come always to make us progress. The greater the difficulty, the greater can be the progress. Be confident and endure with love and blessings." He who wants to advance on the path of perfection must never complain about difficulties on the way, for each is an opportunity for a new progress. To complain is a sign of weakness and insincerity. If you keep your faith unshaken and your heart always open to me, then all difficulties, however great, will contribute to the greater perfection of your being. Always when one faces difficulties and overcomes them, it begins a new spiritual opening and victory. 7 December 1937. All difficulties are there to test the endurance of the faith. June 1956. What I meant is that life is always full of difficulties, hardships, and sufferings. This is a common fact, and each one has to face his own lot of them. The only way to face them properly is to endure and to put one's interest, hope, and faith in the inner life and consciousness. Turn towards the divine, aspiring for the divine, and capable of receiving the divine's force and help. But often the vital being, or some part of it, takes a kind of perverse pleasure in giving a dramatic importance to each and every difficulty, and thus cuts the contact with the inner being and the divine's force. This bad habit, which is common to many people, must be stopped, and then each one can and will feel that he receives very concretely the help he needs to go through the ordeals of life. 2nd February 1964. Our ordeals never exceed our capacity of resistance. The difficulties are for the strong and help to make them stronger. Persevere, and you will conquer. You can be sure that my help, force, and blessings are always with you. With love. 12 July 1966.